and welcome to Dojo Live this Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. For our first show this week, it's going to be a great show as we dive into biologic therapeutics in the AI/ML era. But before we do that, we'd really like to get to know our guest a bit better. Talking with us today is Eddie Moeller, who is the VP of Data Science at Juvena Therapeutics. Eddie, thank you for joining us.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. It's going to be fun. So as we kick it off, we'd like to know your story a bit, Eddie. Kind of what's your passion? What did you do to become this VP of Data Science? Why data science? And of course, how that led up to Juvena.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've always been interested. I was always interested in science and technology both. Through my undergraduate and graduate school, I studied, majored in chemistry, but was always drawn to that computational side and the data analysis side. And so that skill set and that interest is what really led to me to go from what was more quantitative physical science way back in the day into the biology and life science applications. I like to say when the data got too big for the biologist to analyze in Excel, that's kind of where I would come in and found my sweet spot, if you like, and then worked over the years through pharmaceutical R&D and discovery, diagnostics development and discovery for medical diagnostics, just the explosion in capabilities through cloud technology and of course AI and ML, like everyone's talking about. That explosion has really just kind of accelerated, what we can do. I think in discovering new biological phenomena and using that to develop new therapeutics for all kinds of rare progressive diseases, aging related diseases to keep people healthy. And so those applications are kind of what drives me in terms of the daily. You're doing something good for the world. You're getting to use some of the coolest new technologies and experiment with them.
I love it.
And then really move things forward.
It's like the best of both worlds. I mean, we get to see a lot of different tech applied here on dojolive, which is super fantastic. But I really personally get to enjoy the ones the most that seem to have a very meaningful, direct impact on the quality, right, of people's lives, and specifically in the health sphere. I think it's super exciting. So let's talk and dive in real quick to Juvena Therapeutics. What is it exactly that you're doing in the problems that you're solving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been with Juvena almost a year at this point. It's an early stage, biopharma startup company. We closed a Series A funding round last year, which, just in time, which sets us up for a really good path for the next couple of years, which is focused on taking what are fairly new discoveries and understandings in stem cell biology and how, tissues develop and heal and grow, and then leverage that to identify and develop new therapies, new treatments based on protein and other biologics, as they're called, that are already many of them naturally secreted by the body, but maybe as you get older, they're not enough. Insulin is kind of a classic example. Human growth hormone. These same kind of things. There's many other factors like that in our bodies that do important things that people are really we're just starting to discover, and that coupled with the ability to just generate large amounts of data in biology, the genomics, the proteomics, the organism level population studies, hundreds of thousands of people, that kind of thing. That kind of data altogether gives us the opportunity now to look for patterns and look for associations and insights, aided by AI and machine learning.
That's fantastic, which I think leads us really well into the question that we're hoping to kind of answer on today's show.
Yes, the question is, how can AI and machine learning accelerate the discovery of new biomedical insights with high therapeutic application potential? Please share with us the answer.
Sure, America, thanks. it seems to me there's a variety of ways and angles that, that AI and ML applications are able to and are accelerating our discovery of new therapeutics. That includes from areas of looking at, these complex literature full of network interactions and associations between proteins and diseases and things like that. But also at the level of automating much of what we do in the discovery and verification validation part of the drug discovery process. So automation at a fairly sophisticated level. Now it's become fairly routine to, do fairly impressive microscopy-based image analysis in an automated way to extract, all the cells in an image from a microscope, all the parts of the cells and the genes and proteins that are, expressed or present there, and where they are in relative to each other and relative to diseased cells and diseased tissues, all that kind of information, right?
That kind of blows my mind. I mean, one of the you'll find if you watch Dojo Live that I always have movie references. I don't know what that says about me as a person.
It helps a lot for me.
Depends on how obscure they are.
Yeah, no. Well, this one I think is pretty mainstream. It's called Contagion. And it's funny because, I mean, we think even if we go back all the way, decades ago with movies like Alien, has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but you see these computer graphic representations of this technology and like they're pulling up all this information very fast. And, one of the scenes that comes to my mind in Contagion is they're talking about, oh, it's like a pig and a bat and they come together and they're looking at this like molecular structure of this virus or something. So like that's real now these days. Like this Hollywood we've caught up rather. I don't know who's caught up to who, but
on some
those
of that,
are the types of imaging you're able to accomplish.
At that level for sure. There's been a lot of advances in that. The AlphaFold 2 are the two kind of come to most people's mind that have been looking at that. Ways for machine learning AI to predict these protein structures, and that actually is a part of also one of the ways that it's accelerating. So when you get to the point of, let's say you have a protein or a peptide that looks like it's promising as a treatment for regrowing muscle or regenerating functional lung tissue. When you're trying to engineer that, you want to change that structure to do things more of what you want it to do and less of what you don't want it to do. It's a normal part of drug discovery, but in the case of proteins, it's especially complicated. And AI/ML now gives you these tools, gives you the ability to predict, like, if I change the sequence of this protein, how will that affect how it interacts with other proteins? And so that sort of thing is pretty real. It's obviously an active area of investigation, like how well does it work and where does it work, all that kind of stuff. But it really does work to some extent. The thing I was describing too, the other kind of automation was more of, you're running experiments and there's hundreds of these little experiments and wells. You're growing cells and treating them with things to see what happens, and automatically reading those, visually reading those images, counting the cells, looking how big they are, if they're changing shape, all the different kinds of things you want to know. That now, rather than having a person manually curate and count, and maybe make a little grid and sample it statistically, now you can just train, the microscopes come with the software to do this now, right? A lot of it. So it just reads and tells you, oh, how many cells, what shape, size, all these different things you want to know, colors. And so it can just do that automatically, right? And
Wow.
So now you generate a lot of data that way, and it accelerates and makes more consistent, essentially, that process, right? That discovery process.
How much information is there left about our bodies that we don't know yet? And with this,
So
with
much.
this technology, okay.
It's a good, very good question, and it is so much because Juvena Therapeutics, we focus on secretomes. So these are the proteins and factors that cells make and secrete out into the body, either into the blood or into the tissues, that tell other cells what to do, right? Or in some way control what's happening. And a good, a good number. One is how many proteins are actually secreted is not even 100% clearly known out of, everything we know about the genome and proteome and so on.
When you say how many, you're not talking about
Yeah.
the quantity of a specific one. You're talking about how many proteins we
Different
actually have.
kinds. Yeah,
Oh,
how many
wow.
different kinds of proteins, exactly, right, and the different forms of them. And so, there's these numbers that depend on how you count it, but you could say that, over half of the secreted proteins that are known to be secreted proteins don't have well-defined function. Like, we don't really know what they do or all the
It must
important
do
things they
something
do.
because it's there, but we don't know
Right.
what.
Right. And the strategy that one of the things that attracted me to Juvena in the first place was kind of the cleverness of the strategy of taking, stem cell biology and the things that these very important, fairly rare kinds of cells are secreting, and looking at those because they're doing something important, right? And figuring out what those things are that they're secreting that are important is kind of what is, what we're focused on. And it's just a very open area, surprisingly.
Mhm.
Right.
Let's take this back a bit to the numbers side. I mean, we're mentioning this isn't genetics therapy. We're not talking about the human genome and things, but just proteins. Earlier in the show, you mentioned you come in with the data, the analytics, where the biologist kind of has to stop, right? Humanly possible. So,
Right.
what does this look like in terms of, let's say, if we were people without this technology, the numbers that we'd be up against and basically the impossibility of it all versus what we're actually capable of by taking advantage of AI and machine learning?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, just in a way, the slightly more mundane example I was just going through of the automating the image analysis from these microscopy experiments. I mean, that's at a rate that's at a rate that you would have to employ, many, many people to sit and tediously do. It's doable, and people used to do it in a sort of, in a way that reduced the scope enough that that it was tractable. But now you don't even have to do that. You can just crank through all of it in an automated way. So that's huge. But then the insights, on the more of the insights on the biology that's going on, like what is happening. So the fact that we have proteomics technologies where we can, really measure the identity and to some extent the concentration, like how much of, 10,000 proteins or so, and out of maybe 20,000 genes in the estimated human body, but each of those proteins have different forms and so on. So depending on how you count it, there's hundreds of thousands of different types of proteins in our body, right? And you just can't, it's just not feasible to examine all of those on a one by one basis and understand what they're doing, because it's all so, interconnected and non-linear, right? And so that's where I think one of the areas where these capability of predictive modeling and artificial intelligence and identifying what are the key factors or drivers, right, that we aren't seeing yet out of this universe of hundreds of thousands of potential protein forms and all the different kinds of cells and tissues in the body, right, and how they respond and
Mhm.
what they do. So all of that is so complex that it just it's crying for these kind of tools to help
And does that get,
interpret.
sorry,
Yeah.
America, I would just have one quick question about these numbers. Is this get amplified? Are you limited at Juvena right now to just human proteins? Or are you also looking into existing proteins from other animals? I mean, let's talk about, I don't know,
Hmm.
starfish or lizards that can regenerate their limbs and
Pigs.
stuff. Are there
Yeah, it's
applications
interesting.
outside of humanity?
It's an interesting question because in this whole field of kind of longevity or aging as related to health and disease, and the ability to regrow limbs and stuff, right? That's very cool. It's funny, the one thing I learned getting into this field specifically with Juvena is, the naked mole rat is an interesting example. You should look it up because as far as anyone can tell, they actually don't die from old age. they can actually reverse and become younger phenotype
What?
even
Okay,
at times.
definitely
And
know what I'm
so
Googling
anyway,
after this
there's
show.
yeah, there's some interesting things there, right? So what we do though, we do focus on human biology, human proteins, partly because things that are starting out, there's a kind of the philosophy or concept here that, or strategy, I guess, really, that things that are starting out as already endogenous, secreted naturally in the body, and maybe just needs to be, modified, amped up or down some, right? Is less likely to have other problems with, generating immune reactions and toxicities and things like that. And so
The
that's
zombie apocalypse, you don't want to kick
yeah,
that off.
right. You don't want it to like your immune system to just, shut down. Yeah. Anyway, that so yeah, so that's the philosophy. But what we do find is it's really interesting that evolutionary conservation of some of these genes and proteins across species uh, is indicative, right, that often that they're important for some reason. That's why they haven't changed much, or why they've changed a lot very recently, right? Both ways. And those actually, so looking across species is informative and helpful. And again, it adds to the complexity, because their genes aren't exactly the same, and some things act differently, but there's a lot of information and analogies, right, between other species and human. So we definitely are using that.
In terms
Interesting.
of data, I'm curious about how do you regulate more information around the world? For example, I imagine that you have your own system at Juvena Therapeutics. It is complex. And then someone in Japan discovers that there are proteins in our left hands and they can do this and this. And so you need to check that information or what is the process?
Yeah, there's continual stream of published and information and public and semi-public data and information, and so keeping up with that is kind of a challenge. That's actually another area where AI tools has actually played a part. We don't do this directly much, but rely on others who do, like natural, like language processing and ways of extracting the relevant new information out of publications in a way that you could search and find, oh, these two proteins are shown to, or there's evidence that they interact and do something important, based on these papers. Just keeping up and finding that stuff is actually harder than it might seem. And so, yeah, we rely on both the public indexing services and some of the commercial services that do now apply. Of course, they have been, but increasingly apply these AI tools to summarize large amounts of scientific text and publications and data. Is that kind of getting towards what you were asking, America?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay,
I think that leads me to a really interesting question in terms of the technology that you use and the methods that you go about making these discoveries. I believe in my mind it makes perfect sense that that's proprietary, right? Belongs to you, Juvena, or whoever else. But what about the discoveries themselves? Are those discoveries proprietary, or does that belong to humanity?
Yeah.
Where does that come into play?
Yeah, it's a interesting kind of interplay you bring up, right, between the public, you might say, and private efforts around these things. At least like in the U.S., the National Institutes of Health and the various agencies, fund a great deal of those kind of fundamental research, those basic discoveries, um, and and that's a great boon to everyone, right? And through the process, well, I mean, it's not, not a great revelation, but through a lot of the discoveries, through the process of patent management, right, intellectual property, that's how they get disclosed to the world. 6 months after you file a patent, it's published, and the world can see it. And then also, yeah, and so from there, these discoveries also, I mean, if we have as a small company, when we have a new, promising therapeutic, it's a new mechanism of action or a different one from what's already been out there. It's to our advantage, right, to let the world know what that is, both for our own, bringing like scientific credibility to what we're doing. We have to show, right? We have to show those discoveries and that data at some point. And as these new discoveries come out, I mean, everyone, of course, like immuno-oncology, right? Immunotherapies is kind of one of the hot topics or most successful areas in recent decades, and that the targets for what they were doing for those first immunotherapies, that became well known, and everybody's jumped on like, oh, holy cow, this is really something. And then the whole world is then benefiting and really working on that discovery. There is a little bit of a private, right, and aspect to it, and so intellectual property protections and so on is really important. But these discoveries are getting out there, I think.
So with AI and machine learning, we have become more faster in analyzing biomedical information. But how faster compared to 10 years ago or 20?
That's a good one. I haven't thought about measuring it exactly like that, like a quantitative, but in terms of it's faster, but we're also generating data faster too. So a typical sequencing run, whole exome sequencing or something like that generates gigabytes of data per sample per person, right? And if you wanted to do that once a year, it's not that bad maybe. But if you want to do once a week or hundreds a week, you couldn't have generated the data that fast in the past, but you certainly couldn't have analyzed it, right? And now we're getting down to, even with those sort of most data intensive applications, now we're getting down to like a children's hospital or in San Diego, I think they demonstrated like a less than 24-hour turnaround time to get like a whole genomic, relevant genomic sequence of a newborn who is failing to thrive. They don't know what's wrong. They're in the neonatal intensive care, right? And they need those answers really fast. And in the past, they would have one hypothesis, might do a test, might get back a result a week or days later, try something, it's not working, they try another one. Now you can do this, send a sample within 24 hours, they get back
at least
over
have a
1,000.
really solid pinpoint of where to start looking first, at least.
Yeah, look at once at over 1,000 different possible conditions and pinpoint the exact one if it's within that group. And so that's really transformational. Couldn't be done without computational technologies, both in the instrumentation, the analysis, and then the interpretation too. And that's a huge part. There's a whole system and kind of its own field of how do you interpret this data and interpret it quickly so that medical professionals can look at it and find what's relevant out of tens of thousands of possible things in a single result.
So we're kind of coming to the final few minutes of the show, Eddie. I'd like to bring it back to you as an individual, your story, your kind of career path. Forgive me, you mentioned at the beginning, you've been into this space for how many years now?
Over 20 years.
Over 20,
between
okay.
Pharmaceutical and medical diagnostics, yeah.
So I guess that's the question of, over these 20 years, what has the day in the life of a data scientist done to change? How have you seen this evolve? And also maybe what does the current, what is it that you do on the day-to-day? Like, how do you spend most of your time? And maybe some tips that you could leave of the decision-making process, how you go about maneuvering yourself in this sea of large data to kind of get the best results as quick as possible.
Yeah. I guess, like I mentioned at the beginning, kind of, being already kind of oriented in terms of analytical skills and, some mathematics and statistics, and interest in science. And one of the things that has become I think increasingly apparent as this field of data science has, come out of essential almost nowhere. We used to call ourselves biostatistics, bioinformatics, and bioinformatics was fairly new at the time at one point too, right? Um, uh, but in this growing data science field, what really becomes important is, I think, not just keeping up and being able to use sort of the current generation of tools, which every year and a half or 2 years is different, but getting domain expertise in the area that your applications are in. So if it's biomedical, or genomics, you're going to need to have the basics of biology, basics of what's DNA, proteins, that sort of RNA, that sort of thing. If it's in financial trading, which I know less about, but I have friends who've gone into that sort of area, right? You got to know a lot about how different measures of the markets and how those work, right? And so just coming at it straight from, hey, I've got some great skills and Python and natural language processing and things like that, or whatever is good, but developing domain expertise is really what I think differentiates a person who's going to be really successful in an area versus someone who can contribute, but you're always hampered if you don't know the terminology and don't know the things that people are looking for in what you're trying to model or predict. So
that's a really good point.
Yeah. And so I know people who've come from working in the lab, pipetting and stuff, really interested in data analysis, end up going on that track and following that and, become data scientists, bioinformaticians that way. Others who come from other kinds of training or straight computer science, but just love, the people I see that have worked the best, and they're just doing their own homework. Like they just love reading about, oh, here's a whole new area, a new disease, a new some biology, something I don't know. You do some reading and come up to speed on it, and it's just a continual process of that. And so that, along with hey, I'm going to try out these new tools. Of course, I'm messing with ChatGPT-4. You're doing these things like that too, right? Just naturally because you're inquisitive and you like it, right? And I think that really serves a person well.
I love it. Is there anything that you did? Were you one of the lucky people who sort of were able to very clearly make your choice of your domain, of the subject matter that you were passionate about, or what was your journey?
Yeah, it's funny because I guess I did make my choice, but it's what I ended up, where I ended up was not exactly where I had initially thought, in the sense that, for example, biochemistry was probably one of my least interesting subjects as a chemistry major. I liked lots of the other stuff, and that was like, oh,
You want to watch things explode and change colors.
And yeah, right. And yeah, thermodynamics and statistical. Anyway, quantum mechanics stuff, very cool stuff. But yeah, that just kind of carried when I ended up working on, developing diagnostic assays and tools for biology and identifying genes and proteins that are important, things like that. Yeah, I didn't have that in mind in my early training. And here I am, working with people trying to make this biochemical assay work as well as it can,
It's really cool. What's one of your most favorite discoveries in terms of biologic therapeutics, or that you've helped make? What do you feel is, or if you don't have a favorite, 2, 3, what are the ones this was phenomenal, this was exciting, and this is what we humanity have been able to achieve because of it?
Yeah, I guess most recently, I was at Quest Diagnostics, which is the largest clinical testing lab in a company. Everybody's been poked by Quest at one time or another, right? And there, I helped scale a team, and that we were able to deliver, dozens of new, what was called advanced diagnostic tests every year. Develop and launch new tests based on these genomics technologies. So it covered a wide range of therapeutic areas, but folks in so patients in neurology now can get these widely available tests that help their physicians and them choose what kind of medications may or may not be right for them, or what kind of therapeutic paths, cardiovascular disease, some oncology, of course, too. Everybody does oncology. And yeah, so a wide range of areas. And I think that's really cool. I mean, because that reaches people directly. You immediately see that real people are, benefiting from what you've just spent, months to years developing and getting out there, and then getting it out there at scale, right? So
Wow.
a place like Quest, you make it available to the whole country, right? Kind of in one shot often.
That's amazing.
And that's pretty cool.
This is a kind of silly question, but maybe it's silly. When you say test, are we talking about like a physical, like the chemical side, the process, or is it the test of we have the sample and now we're running it through computer programming? Like, what's the test you're referring
yeah,
to?
sure. So in this case, yeah, it's all those things. So the test is a person, your doctor writes like, hey, we should get these diagnostic tests done based on your visit. And you either can write there, or you make an appointment to go and maybe have blood drawn, or cheek swab, or whatever the sample is. But it's just like, think of a regular blood test, like cholesterol. It's like that, except it's behind the scenes. It's way more complex, right? What's going on? There's a huge amount of data being generated, potentially like genomic and other kinds of data that's then being processed and analyzed according to these validated algorithms that we had to develop and prove work under regulatory requirements, and then that goes back to the patient and the physician, along with, not unimportantly, the information and context they need to understand their test result, right? So that's the test, when I say that. Yeah.
It's the computer. You're telling it what to do.
It's taking measuring something about a patient and getting it back to the right people, them and their doctor, and so
That's insane.
so that they can be sure that it's accurate and that they're interpreting it correctly. Right?
I love it.
Yeah, not a small thing. It sounds like
not a small
regular thing, but it's not a small thing.
No, I mean, if you're talking, this wasn't you, but we're talking about millions probably of different data points, right?
Yeah, it can be, right? Exactly.
It's crazy. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Eddie, for your time today, your knowledge today, what you and your team are doing and accomplishing at Juvena. It's definitely not a small feat. And that's all I can say. Thank you. It's been our pleasure to learn from you here on Dojo Live.
Thanks. Yeah, I've enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me, Kim, America. And
thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Stick around for just a minute as we go off air. But before we do, we'd like to remind our viewers of what we've got coming up for tomorrow.
Yay! Tomorrow we're going to have another show with Roy Gansarski, CEO at the company Elythion. The topic is going to be about digital world, Web3. Let's not forget we still live in the physical world. How can optical AI tech improve security and trust while linking the digital and physical worlds without harming physical asset integrity? Okay, I need to do research for that.
Yeah, I think it's all about pictures and blockchain and AI analysis, and it's going to be really, really, really interesting. All right, so let's check it out tomorrow, 10 o'clock Pacific. Thank you again, Eddie, and everyone for joining us here on Dojo Live.